Season of what could have been. I still remember the day I met Daniel. It was autumn, 1985. The kind of crisp October afternoon where the leaves weren't just falling, they were dancing. I was 23, working at Richardson's bookstore in our small Connecticut town, arranging a display of new releases when the bell above the door jingled. He walked in with wind-tousled hair and a worn leather jacket, looking slightly lost among the shelves. There was something about the way he moved. Careful, deliberate, like he was afraid of disturbing the silence that blankets every good bookstore. "Can I help you find something?" I asked, and he looked up with eyes that reminded me of the sea after a storm. "Poetry," he said. "Specifically, Mary Oliver." And that was when I knew we'd be friends, at the very least. Not many men in our town were seeking out Mary Oliver's words about wild geese and summer days. I led him to the poetry section, our fingers accidentally brushing as I handed him the book. That small touch. I can still feel it sometimes, like a phantom sensation. A road marker for what would become the most beautiful detour of my life. Daniel was passing through town, photographing New England's fall colors for a magazine. He was supposed to stay 3 days. He stayed 3 weeks. We spent every evening together after I closed the shop. Walking along the river, sitting on park benches with coffee that turned cold because we forgot to drink it, too wrapped up in conversation. He told me about growing up in Oregon, about wanting to capture the world through his camera lens. I told him about my dreams of writing, the journal I'd kept since I was 12, the stories I created but never showed anyone. "You should let people read them," he said one night as we sat on the hood of his car, watching stars appear one by one. "Your words matter, Elizabeth." It was the way he said my name. Like he was savoring it. Not Liz or Lizzie like everyone else called me. Elizabeth. Full and complete. The night before he was supposed to leave, we stood in my tiny apartment kitchen. I was making pasta, and he was leaning against the counter, watching me stir the sauce. The radio played softly in the background. Stevie Nicks singing about crystal visions. "Come with me," he said suddenly. The wooden spoon stilled in my hand. "What?" "Come with me to California. I have this assignment at Big Sur. It's beautiful there, you'd love it. We could drive down the coast. You could write while I photograph." His words came quickly, like he'd been holding them back. "Daniel, I can't just, why not?" He stepped closer, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "What's keeping you here, really?" I had no answer. My parents had moved to Florida years ago. My job at the bookstore was just that. A job. I'd never left New England. The farthest west I'd been was Pittsburgh for a cousin's wedding. "Think about it," he whispered. "Just think about it." Later that night, as we lay tangled in my sheets, I pictured it, California sunshine, ocean views, waking up next to him every morning. A life painted in vibrant colors rather than the muted tones I'd grown accustomed to. "Okay," I said into the darkness. "I'll go." He pulled me closer, buried his face in my neck. "We'll leave tomorrow afternoon." I spent the morning packing, selecting which books to take, which clothes, which memories. Called my boss at the bookstore to apologize for the short notice. She understood more than I expected. "Sometimes life hands you an adventure, Elizabeth," she said. "You'd be a fool not to take it." Daniel was supposed to pick me up at 2. I sat on my suitcase by the door at 1:30, heart racing with nervous excitement. At 2:15, I wasn't worried yet. By 3, I began to wonder. At 4, I called the motel where he'd been staying. "Mr. Harrison checked out this morning," the clerk informed me. Around 9. The room tilted slightly. I hung up without saying goodbye. I waited until midnight, sitting by the window, watching headlights pass on the street below, each one making my heart leap before plummeting again. He never came. No note. No call. Just gone. For weeks, I expected to hear from him. Surely there was an explanation. An emergency, a misunderstanding. I called the magazine he'd mentioned working for, but they had no record of a Daniel Harrison. Eventually, I had to face the truth. Whatever we had shared hadn't been enough. Or perhaps it had been too much, too fast. Maybe he'd woken up that morning and realized he didn't want the responsibility of someone else's heart, someone else's dreams accompanying him. I stayed at the bookstore. Seasons changed. Life continued its steady march forward. I dated occasionally, but never felt that same spark, that sense of standing on the edge of something magnificent. It was 5 years later when I saw his photograph in a magazine. I recognized his style immediately. The way he captured light, found beauty in ordinary moments. The article mentioned he'd won awards for his work in war-torn countries. There was a small picture of him, looking older, more weathered, standing beside a woman and a little boy. I sat in my living room for hours with that magazine, tracing his face with my fingertip. The what-ifs crowded my mind like birds taking flight all at once. What if I'd gone looking for him? What if he'd come back for me? What if? Life continued. I became the manager of the bookstore, eventually buying it when the owner retired. I started a writing group, published a few short stories in literary journals. I married a kind, steady man named Thomas who never made me feel like I was standing on the precipice of something extraordinary, but who also never made me feel abandoned. We had a daughter, Sarah, who inherited my love of books and storytelling. Thomas and I divorced when she was 12. Amicably, without drama, two people acknowledging that companionship without passion can only sustain you for so long. On my 45th birthday, I received a package. No return address, just my name written in handwriting I still recognized despite the decades that had passed. Inside was a book. A photography collection titled Moments Between Moments. Daniel's name graced the cover. I opened it with trembling hands. There, on page 23, was a photograph of me. Standing in the bookstore, arranging books, sunlight streaming through the window, catching my hair. I looked young, unaware of being observed, completely absorbed in my task. The caption read simply, Elizabeth, Connecticut. The road not taken. Tucked inside the book was a letter. Elizabeth, if you're reading this, the investigator I hired found you. I hope this doesn't disrupt your life. I debated for years whether to reach out, whether I had the right. First, I owe you an explanation. That morning, I received a call. My father had suffered a massive stroke. I rushed to the airport, intending to call you from Oregon, to explain, to ask you to wait. But when I arrived, the situation was worse than I'd imagined. He lingered for weeks in a coma before passing. By then, I was handling his affairs, supporting my mother through her grief. Days stretched into weeks, weeks into months. When I finally called the bookstore, they told me you'd left. The new address they had was no longer current. This was before the internet made finding people easy. I convinced myself it was too late, that you'd moved on, perhaps hated me for disappearing. I've thought of you every single day since that October. Every single day, Elizabeth. My life took turns I never expected. Assignments in conflict zones, a brief marriage that ended when my wife realized she'd always be competing with the ghost of someone she'd never met. My son, Alex, is in college now. He's a writer, like the woman I once knew who kept her stories hidden away. I told him about you once, when he asked why I never remarried. I told him some loves mark you forever, even when they're brief. I'm not expecting anything. I just needed you to know that the day I didn't show up was the greatest regret of my life. And I needed you to know that you were never forgotten, not for a single moment. If you ever find yourself in Oregon, my address is on the back of this letter. My door is always open to you. With love, still, Daniel. I sat with that letter for days, reading and rereading it until the paper began to soften along the creases. I told no one about it, this message from a past that suddenly felt present again. 3 months later, I found myself on a plane to Oregon. Not running toward or away from anything, but simply following a thread that had remained unbroken for 22 years. The drive from Portland to the coastal address he'd provided gave me too much time to think, to doubt, to consider turning around. But something pulled me forward. Not hope, exactly, but a need for completion, for understanding what might have been. His house sat on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, modern yet warm, walls of glass framing the endless horizon. I parked beside an older Jeep and sat in my rental car for several minutes, gathering courage. When I knocked, the door was opened by a tall young man with familiar eyes. "You must be Elizabeth," he said, smiling slightly. "He said you might come someday." He had his father's mouth, the same curve when he smiled. "I'm Alex." "Is he?" My voice sounded foreign to my own ears. "On the beach," Alex replied, gesturing toward a path that led down the cliffside. "He goes there every evening to watch the sunset. Take the wooden stairs all the way down." I found him sitting on a driftwood log, camera on his lap, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. His hair had gone gray, but his profile was exactly as I remembered. He sensed my presence before I spoke, turning slowly as if afraid I might be a mirage. "Elizabeth." My name on his lips still sounded the same. "Daniel." I sat beside him, both of us facing the ocean rather than each other, the space between us charged with decades of unspoken words. The waves crashed and receded, crashed and receded. "I got your book," I finally said. "Your letter." He nodded, still looking forward. "I wasn't sure you would." "I've had a good life," I told him. "Not the one I might have had, but a good one." "I'm glad," he said, and I could hear the sincerity in his voice. "You deserved that and more." The sun touched the water, setting the ocean ablaze with orange and gold. Neither of us spoke as it made its slow descent, as if we both understood that some moments can't be captured in words. Finally, in the gathering twilight, he turned to face me. "I've imagined this moment thousands of times," he said. "And now I don't know what to say." I smiled at him then, really smiled, feeling something shift and settle inside me. "Then don't say anything." I reached for his hand. The same hand I'd held under New England stars a lifetime ago. He interlaced his fingers with mine, and we sat in silence as the last light faded from the sky. That was 15 years ago now. I didn't stay in Oregon, and he didn't come back east. We both had lives, responsibilities, routines that couldn't be easily abandoned. But we found a way to weave our separate paths together. Visits every few months. Long phone calls. Emails filled with the minutiae of our days. 2 years ago, I sold the bookstore and moved to a small house just 10 minutes from his. Not to begin again, we're too old for that now, in our 60s with gray hair and laugh lines. But to see what might grow in the soil of our late-life connection. Sometimes I think about that autumn day when he walked into my bookstore and changed the course of my life, even though we took such different roads. I think about how love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. How sometimes it's not about grand passion or perfect timing, but about the quiet recognition that some connections never truly break, even when stretched across decades. Last week, I finally let him read one of my stories. Not published, just written for myself. He read it sitting on my porch, the afternoon light catching the silver in his hair, his eyes moving carefully across each line. When he finished, he looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "This is what I always knew was inside you," he said. Later, as we walked along the shore, I asked him if he ever regrets the way things happened. That he didn't come back for me, that I didn't try harder to find him. "Every day," he answered honestly. "And never. Because regret implies I would change it if I could, and I'm not sure I would." Everything led us here, Elizabeth. To this moment, walking this beach. our children, our experiences, the people we became separately, all of it was necessary. I understood what he meant. The young woman waiting with her suitcase by the door and the young man rushing to his father's bedside couldn't have built what we have now. We needed to become who we are. Sometimes, when I watch him photographing the sunset or cooking dinner in my kitchen, I feel a bittersweet ache for those lost years. But mostly, I feel grateful for this unexpected third act. For the chance to discover that love doesn't always arrive when or how we expect it to, but sometimes circles back around when we're finally ready to receive it. And maybe that's the truest kind of love. Not the one that sweeps you off your feet when you're young, but the one that finds you again when you've learned how to stand firmly on your own. The love that knows your whole story, even the chapters you weren't in, and cherishes you not despite your separate journey, but because of it.